Alright, let's take a look at how much damage just a Thunder Crash can do on its own with a debuff. I'm sorry, it does what? Tethered.
No A-tracks. Anytime you want to, you can look straight at us.
Yep, agree.
And out of ammo.
Come on, T-Crash, yes!
There we go.
And all that before the bomb phase. Okay, first things first. How we looking, boys? How's the drip? Do I look like I'm straight out of the Matrix? Okay, no, actually, for real though. So, today I want to talk about Titan DPS. Recently in this episode, we've had a lot of really, really dumb things come out for Titan where they can take advantage of the meta in this episode. Mainly Bolt Charge with things like Le Monarch and Thunderlord and Anarchy in certain encounters. But what about combining the stupidity of Bolt Charge with Storm's Keep with the best DPS weapon currently in the game, at least for this episode, that being conveniently an arc weapon, Queenbreaker. Ignoring Bolt Charge for a second, and we already know how stupid that is in itself, Queenbreaker in its own right is already god tier, given that Linear's got a global damage buff this episode by 10%, then Queenbreaker got a new sight, making it a 3-burst linear for DPS, and they got a brand new catalyst with literally one of the best perks in the entire game, that being rewind rounds. So combining the two just means the build is going to be incredibly dumb. We're also going to be adding a brand new artifact to this equation with the Act 2 launch of Heresy, and that is going to be Limit Break, which states, casting a super while you are critically wounded or have an elemental buff matching your super element grants you a period of increased super damage, which we can easily accomplish. For our exotic armor piece, we're rocking Curse of the Falling Star to pump the damage of Thunder Crash, though I did want to mention that you can also opt to run Hazardous Propulsion in the event that you want to get some rockets out with your Rally Barricade, as you're going to be spamming it either way, but you do want to mainly utilize Curus because you're using Limit Break to pump the damage of your super anyway. Now we'll get back to the exotics a little bit later, but first let's go over the kit and explain why we're using certain things in this build with the thought of Act 2 already being out live and then adding some new artifacts which are going to be very good for this build. With that idea in mind, here we go. Our super is going to be Thunder Crash, of course, for damage. In our abilities, our Barricade is going to be Rally Barricade, just to keep abusing Bolt Charge as everyone has this entire episode. Next, for our melee, I'm going with Thunderclap. The main reason I'm picking Thunderclap is because if there are any trash mobs around us, basically anything that's lower than a yellow bar or a mini-boss, we can just one-shot it with Thunderclap. When we do that, Thunderclap will give us Amplified. When we have Amplified, that means we're carrying an Arc Elemental buff, which means we're triggering Limit Break to do more damage with our super. So it's just an easy out. For my grenade, I have Flashbang. No particular reason other than the fact that this episode I want to use anything that I can in my abilities to stun unstops, and Flashbang does that, so that's why I have this here, but you can replace this for a different grenade if you want. For my aspects, tell me if you heard this before, I have Storm's Keep and Knockout. I know, very original. No, but actually Knockout does play a purpose in this other than just being a stupid ability, and that is it gives me Amplified when I get melee kills. So when I was talking about Thunderclap earlier, that's what I was talking about in combination with Knockout. And then moving into our fragments, I have 4 of them. They are the following. Number 1, Spark of Ions. Defeating a jolted target or defeating a target with Bolt Charge gives us an Ionic Trace. Number 2 is going to be Spark of Frequency. The first half really doesn't matter, but the second half, which states, while amplified, the effects are increased and you gain increased stacks of Bolt Charge from all sources. That's the main part of this that we want, so that's why it's here. Number 3 is going to be Spark of Shock. Your arc grenades jolt targets, just some extra damage. And lastly, Spark of Resistance. While surrounded by commands, you are more resistant to incoming damage. Pretty standard. Quick edit here, I forgot to mention the easiest way to become amplified besides the melee portion of this build, and that's going to be in our artifact, which is going to be Flashover. So when we gain maximum stacks of Bolt Charge, you also become amplified. Essentially, you put down your barricade, you wait a couple seconds, and you're instantly amplified. Now, moving along, I do want to mention one more piece to this loadout, and it's going to be our kinetic slot weapon, at least in my case. And this is going to be Tenacious Mastery. There's two reasons for this. Number one, it applies Choke Clip, which means it applies a Darkness debuff onto an enemy, so anybody on your team that's using Prismatic can take advantage of this to get bonus damage while they're on Prismatic with Facet of Courage. The second reason is, in the event that you cannot become amplified or have some sort of Arc Elemental buff on you, Tenacious can give you self-damage, and you can make yourself critical, which then also does trigger Limit Break in the event that that is your only choice to give yourself bonus super damage. It can just do that job by shooting your own feet at the floor. Now, of course, Tenacious is not mandatory. You can actually just use any Rocket item that you like. The new Void one from the GM Nightfalls, Indebted Kindness, the Solar one from Echoes, and so on. Or if by some miracle you don't own a single Rocket sidearm, you could also use any Waveframe GL and do the same thing. Aim at your feet, make your health critical, and once you do, you will have access to Limit Break to do bonus damage with your super. Now onto the gameplay loop itself. So it's pretty straightforward. You have one of two options to start your damage phase. You can either be immediately on Curse of the Falling Star, which I typically would recommend for most bosses, or you can start on Hazardous Propulsion if you're fighting a boss where you can't immediately Thunder Crash. For example, when you're fighting the Witness, 95% of that damage phase, you cannot Thunder Crash him. You will literally die trying. There is a small window where you can Thunder Crash when he tries to do the slam attack, where it would just kill you if you're touching the ground. You can jump and then activate Thunder Crash, and then literally hit the Witness's hand to do damage with T-Crash, and that is your only instance of doing that. So you can make the decision if you want to run Curious for that, or just run Hazardous the entire time and not do that. That's up to you, but that is your two options of how you want to start your damage phase. But most bosses are approachable, so for a standard damage phase, here's what I would do. I would make sure that I have some sort of buff ready, or I can immediately get a buff as the damage phase is starting to get amplified, so a melee kill, for example. Pop my barricade, make sure I'm amplified, then I pop my super with T-Crash, get Limit Break active with that, as well as Curse of the Falling Star for massive damage with Thunder Crash. Then I go back to my barricade, I keep building Bolt Charge stacks, I pop another barricade, missiles come out for extra damage, then I just keep shooting with Queen Breaker. In the event that it's an extremely long damage phase and you happen to get a second super back, at this point you might not have enemies to proc an instant amplified or get an arc buff, so you can utilize Tenacious or whatever your other weapon is to try to lower yourself in health to proc Limit Break again, and then do your second super with bonus damage once again. But in most cases, you'll never have to worry about that, as 95% of the time the boss will be long dead before you ever get a second super, so don't put too much stock into that. Lastly, let's go over the armor mods. So for artifact mods, there's going to be the three big ones in the back, which are Flashover to do bonus damage with our bolt charges, Particle Reconstruction to do bonus damage with our linear, in this case Queen Breaker, and then lastly, normally I would say Defibrillating Blast, but in this case we have to replace that with Limit Break because you can't have three mods on in that final column, so Limit Break takes the last slot. And for the actual armor mods, here we go at the top with Helmet. So the first mod is going to be a Siphon mod. In my case, it's a Void Weapon in my energy slot, but for you it might be something different. And then I have two copies of Hands-On next to it. So the main reason for this is because Curious has a second grade effect, which states that while amplified, you get bonus super energy on melee kills, and our melee makes us amplified, so it's basically instantly live when we get melee kills. This gives you chunks of super energy when you get a melee kill, and a great example for this would be the Puppeteer, where you're fighting the Puppeteer, but it makes a bunch of clones, and then you can just punch the clones and get a ton of super energy from that, and in that case, you probably will have a second super in a single damage phase to use. So that's why I have these on in the helmet slot. And speaking of which, in my gloves, I have one copy of Heavy Handed for the exact same thing. If I'm going to be getting melee kills, I might as well make an Aura of Power and get a chunk of super energy out of it as well. For the other two mods, I have Arc Loader, which is pretty straightforward, and then one copy of Bowstring Detonation for when I throw a grenade and jolt an enemy or a boss. I'll also get some energy back into my barricade. For my chest, it's pretty standard: one Arc Resist, one Solar Resist, or whatever content you're doing, you need a different one, and then one copy of Arc Reserves just to get extra ammo into Queen Breaker. For my boots, it's pretty straightforward: 3 Arc Weapon Surges to pump the damage of Queen Breaker, and then lastly, the class item, we have one copy of Bomber to reduce our grenade cooldown when we use our barricade, one copy of Distribution to reduce our cooldowns in every ability when we're near a target and we use our barricade, and then lastly, Powerful Attraction for when we do pop our barricade, we also scoop up orbs around us that were created during whatever phase of the fight we're in. All in all, the power creep for Arc Titans this episode is off the goddamn charts. It's actually ridiculous how they went from being absolute garbage tier and only using Prismatic Titan to now Arc Titan taking everything over and having basically a build for everything in the game. But what do you guys think? Agree? Disagree? In the meantime, I will have a dim link for this build down in the description below, as always. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. If you want to go the extra mile, you could also leave a like and or comment below as well. If you don't know what to leave as a comment, you can leave Storm's Keep as the comment. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.